everybody, welcome back to the channel. Thank you for tuning in. This week I am out and about once again running some errands in my GTR. Actually, I'm doing cake deliveries for my wife and her bakery. So I'm gonna be in the car for a little while and thought it'd be a good time to have a little chat. Now, I've been getting more and more frustrated recently when I see posts on either the GTR pages on Facebook or on Instagram or Reddit or something like that about all of these misconceptions and myths about the R35 GTR, and they seem to be constantly moved forward by people, and I can only assume that they're people who don't own the car and they're only parroting what they've heard other people say before. So in this video, what I want to do is I'd like to discuss what some of these myths and misconceptions are, talk about whether or not they're true or not, maybe where they came from, how they maybe no longer apply, and just kind of try and set the record straight on this car, because there is a lot of misinformation about it. However, before we get to that, two things. One, if you'd like to see more automotive, particularly GTR content in the future, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And two, if you'd like to support the channel, I do have the JD Archer shop. If you go to jdarcher.bigcartel.com, you can see a limited selection of t-shirts I've designed that are for sale. And there is a new design up. For those of you that have been following me on Instagram or on the YouTube posts, I've been working to convert my buddy Mike's Nissan R35 Skyline GTR in Bayside Blue in a kind of more of an animation style avatar, and I finished that and I put it on the background of the rising sun of Japan with the Tokyo skyline. So that is now on the site and for sale now. Whether you want the print on the front or the back, I have both versions. But with that out of the way, let's get to the video. The first myth I want to talk about when it comes to the R35 GTR is, to be honest, the biggest one. In fact, it was the one you probably thought of as soon as you saw the title for this video, and that is the transmission. Now, inevitably, it seems like this is a weekly occurrence. You will see somebody post up on Facebook or Reddit or something like that about how the transmissions on this car are just absolutely made of glass, and if you buy one, it's gonna grenade on you, and you're gonna be about $20,000 to repair it. And I'm gonna let you know right now that that myth is completely false. That's completely not true. However, I do understand why it's kind of out there, because it does have a base in the history of the GTR. And that is back when the car first came out in 2008. Real quick clarification for those that don't know, the 2008 to 2011 GTRs are referred to as CBAs. So when the car first came out in 2008, Nissan had a launch control feature on the car, and it's controlled by a computer program that they called LC1 or Launch Control 1. Well, LC1, when you launched the car, you actually launched at a very high RPM and had a lot of power. And yes, launching at that high of RPM with that much torque and that much power, people were in fact shearing the gears in their transmission. Fortunately, this is something that Nissan figured out pretty darn quick, and they quickly released LC2, which basically had the car launch at a much lower RPM and therefore was a lot less problematic with the transmissions. Now, over the years, Nissan's continued to work on the launch control program to the fact they're now at LC5. So they've continuously refined the program so you can launch with the most amount of power, but with the least amount of danger to your transmission. So if you're looking at a CBA, all you really have to do is ask the owner or take it down to Nissan, have it checked, and make sure that that launch control is running any program LC2 or above, and you're fine. So this really isn't an issue anymore, and I'm just really tired of seeing it online. However, there is another issue with the transmissions that come with the CBAs particularly, and that is, for some reason, when Nissan released the transmissions, they used a very soft metal on the solenoids that control which gear you're in, and over time they round out. And when this happens, something kind of weird happens. You lose half your gears, but you don't lose them in a way you would think about. You either lose all of the even gears or you lose all of the odd gears. Fortunately, this is a very cheap and easy fix. People have already figured this out over the years and already have a fix for it. All you have to do is go online and look for what's called Tsb Clips. They're gonna run you about $45, and they're these little metal clips that go over the solenoids. It's a very easy process to do if you're an at-home mechanic yourself. All you have to do is take off the oil pan of the transmission. The solenoids are right there. You drop them out, you put on the clips, you put the transmission back together, and for $45 you have a transmission that's, I'm going to say, almost as good as a DBA transmission. It's still going to be pretty beefy. Or if you're not mechanically inclined, from what I've seen, most mechanics will charge you about $700 to $800 to fix it. So if you are picking up a GTR, if you're picking up a DBA, you're perfectly fine. You don't need to worry about the transmission at all, as long as you're running stock or what's called full bolt-on FBO levels of power. The transmission's really not going to give you an issue. However, if you're picking up a CBA, very easy thing to avoid. All you have to do is check to make sure the launch control is a launch control 2 or higher, and the Tsb Clips have been done, and the transmission really shouldn't give you any problems. Building off of talking about working on the transmission, the next myth I want to talk about that I see posted a lot is that the car is an expensive car to maintain, work on, and keep on the road. Now, I'm going to let you know also right away that this is completely not true. I can tell you from personal experience. However, I can completely understand where this myth came from and why it's still alive today. And that has to do with the famous Gtr tax. If you've ever paid attention to anybody talking about parts or working on the car with a mechanic, or especially going to Nissan, they always talk about the Gtr tax. And that's just kind of the little joke that we have, referring to the fact that it seems like anytime you show up with the GTR, things are more expensive and mechanics are going to charge you more. And that's kind of true. When you take a look at intakes for something like a Kia Stinger, you can get just standard intakes, or just made of tube, for about $200, $300, where with the GTR, people want $600 for just a set of intakes. They're just simple tubes with some cone filters, and they want $600 for it. So yes, certain things like that, there is the Gtr tax, so I can understand where this myth comes from. However, I can tell you that to keep this car on the road and running well is not expensive at all. In fact, this car's been cheaper than I think all of my other cars. When I think back to both my Mark IV Supras, my FDR X7, even my Mitsubishi Eclipse, those cars were running me more per month to keep them on the road than this car ever has. This is a very well-designed car. Things typically don't break. And as long as you're willing to shop around, there's actually not that expensive to maintain. For example, oil changes on this car. Nissan suggests you use Mobil 1 040, and that's what I use, and it runs me $45 in oil change. That's cheaper than what it used to cost my Supra. Now, granted, spark plugs are a little bit more expensive at about $100 a set. They used to be about $40 on the Supra, so it's a little bit more expensive, but as you can see, it's not that ridiculous. Now, where people run into problems with the car being expensive to maintain and keep on the road is if they take it to Nissan to do the work. Do not take it to Nissan to do the work. They will overcharge you, and it's ridiculous. As an example, when I first bought the car, it needed the rear brakes done, rotors and pads. Nissan wanted $4,300 to do the rear brakes. I completely understand where this myth came from, because that's just stupidly ridiculous. Nobody should ever pay that amount. However, you go to a third-party group like Speed by Design, and they got a whole set of rotors and pads for $1,300, which is about what you would spend for rotors and pads on any other car. And as long as you're willing to do the work yourself, that only costs you the $1,300. So in that, this car is not that expensive to maintain and keep on the road, and even upgrade, really, if you think about it. But be prepared. Yeah, you are going to end up spending more for the parts, but as long as you're not taking it to Nissan to work on, the price isn't that bad to keep it on the road. The next myth I want to talk about is one that I've seen echoed in a lot of people who review the cars. Now, granted, a lot of people who reviewed the cars did it years ago, so maybe things have changed, but a lot of them seem to make the comment that the car had a very numb feeling and it felt like playing a video game. And I've got to be honest, I have no idea what started that, but I find it completely untrue. I mean, the car is heavy. Maybe that's why it feels a little bit more numb, but I mean, it's got a pretty stiff suspension, so you are going to feel the road even when the suspension is set in comfort mode. I've had the car on the track, and I had a good sense of speed in what I was doing the whole time I was there. So I don't know why people seem to think it's so numb and it feels like a video game, aside from the fact that maybe they're loyal to their 90s import tuners or the R35 GTR, and so they feel like this is an affront to that particular way of thinking. And I just don't think that's true at all. Now, another thing that they were saying is that the car has just so many computers that it doesn't even really need the driver. The car pretty much takes care of itself, and the driver's really more of a passenger. There again, I have actually had this car out on the track at Willow Springs, and I did not get that at all. I mean, the car did scare me quite a bit because it does have so much power. Now, yeah, maybe in the back of my head, I know there's so many computers in the car that I know I could push the car a little bit harder and the computers will be there to save me, maybe. But let's be honest, physics are physics. If I'm going around a corner way too hard and the compound of the tires just don't have the grip, or I'm accelerating through a corner, which is something you should never do, then yeah, no matter what those computers are doing, you still can't beat the physics of the grip of the compound of the tires and the lateral G-forces. So I don't feel that this is a numb car at all. My biggest complaint with driving the car is, as far as not feeling connected to the road, is just how high I feel I sit in this car. I feel like I'm so far off the pavement, whereas with a lot of my other cars, I felt like I was almost sitting on the pavement. And yeah, maybe that did give me more of a sensation of being connected to the road because I felt lower, where this car, I feel so high. But I can tell you, feedback through the steering wheel, you know, like the G-forces I was feeling in the seat, this car does not feel numb at all. In fact, it's pretty damn fun. The next myth I want to talk about when it comes to the GTR is, well, it's kind of a smaller myth, but it is one I see pop up here and there. And that is, if you do any type of modification to the car whatsoever, you have to retune your fuel curves. And I've got to let you know right now that that's, well, that one's kind of true a little bit. It really does depend. Now, unlike some other cars, it seems like with this car, you do have to get into tuning fuel curves a lot sooner in the modification process than you do with other cars. Basically, with this car, you can run a Y pipe and a catback exhaust without having to deal with tuning the fuel curves. But if you get rid of the cats that are run underneath the turbo, yeah, you have to worry about tuning your fuel curves. Now, when it comes to intakes, this is where this myth really came from and why it's kind of true. If you do something as simple as changing out the intakes, you might have to tune your fuel curves. And the reason why I say might is if you pick up a full 3-inch intake, yes, you're going to have to pick up an Ecotec or a Cobb access port, and you are going to have to tune your fuel curves. However, if you only pick up a 2 3/4 inch intake, you can actually still run your stock tune from the factory. So basically, you can't go as far with modding the car without having to do your fuel curves. Pretty much as soon as you want to upgrade your intakes to something bigger than a 2 3/4 and you want to do more to your exhaust than just do a Y pipe and a catback, yes, you're going to have to start worrying about tuning your fuel curves. Another one of the misconceptions floating around out there is that you can't work on the GTR yourself. You have to take it to a certified GTR mechanic. And fortunately, that's a very easy myth to dispel. For those of you that have been following my channel for any amount of time, you know I've done plenty of work on this car myself without an issue. It's just like any other car. However, that being said, I do kind of understand where maybe this myth came from. And that's because, yes, this car does have a lot of computers in it. And I can completely understand where people feel like maybe they have to be almost a computer programmer to do anything to this car. And it's just an assumption they make. But despite the fact that this car has so many computers, it still comes down to a basic internal combustion engine. Anybody who can turn a wrench can do the work on this car yourself. Now, also building off of that too, not as much of a degree, some people believe that you can't take this car to anybody but a GTR tech. And of course, as you know, I've taken this car to Specialty Z. There's a guy that works there named Sebastian. Any year GTR, from like a Hakasuka all the way up to a 35, this dude is a phenomenal mechanic. He doesn't work for Nissan. He's never worked for Nissan, but this guy knows these cars inside and out and can do anything you want to do to these cars. So don't let that myth kind of dissuade you. If you are somebody who likes to work on the car yourself, there's plenty you can do in your own home garage, and don't feel like you have to take it to Nissan to work on the car. If there is a reputable GTR shop in your area, you can take it there without an issue. Another myth you may have heard about the GTR is it's not a Skyline. I'm sure you've been online and you've seen people post up something. Inevitably, someone along the line posts, you know it's not a Skyline, right? The GTR is not a Skyline. And I'm going to let you know that that myth is actually, in my opinion, correct. I actually don't think that the GTR is a Skyline. In fact, I did a whole video of it back in the day trying to explore whether or not the GTR was a Skyline, and I found that it wasn't. If you haven't seen that video, I will post a banner above my head, as well as put a link in the description down below, so you can kind of see my exploration and my reasons as to why I think the GTR is not a Skyline, and there's more reasons than you probably think. The last myth I want to talk about when it comes to the GTR is actually doesn't have anything to do with the R35. It has to do with the new upcoming R36 GTR. And I'm sure you've seen lots of things out there saying that the car is either going to be fully electric or it's going to be a hybrid. It's going to have this feature, it's going to be able to do that. It's 0 to 60 times going to be this, it's going to have this much horsepower. And I want to let you know right now that all that information is purely speculation and guessing. Nissan hasn't released any information whatsoever when it comes to the next iteration of GTR. In fact, they haven't even confirmed there is going to be another generation of GTR. Granted, right now, you know, they're focused on the new Z car and hyping that and supporting it, so the GTR really isn't on their agenda at the moment. We can only hope that, yes, there will be another iteration of the GTR coming down, but it's probably years down the line before we actually see anything happen. So anything you see that says that the car is going to be one thing or another, unless it comes from Nissan themselves, basically figure it's just conjecture and speculation and take it with a grain of salt. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's kind of fun to speculate and dream and try and figure out what the next GTR will be. But just remember, unless it comes from Nissan, it's probably just a rumor. And there it is, some of the myths and misconceptions about the R35 GTR dispelled. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, go hit that thumbs up button to let me know. It does help the channel a lot. As I did say at the beginning of the video, if you want to see more automotive, particularly GTR content in the future, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You can also follow me on all forms of social media, which include Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. There'll be links to all those in the description down below. If after watching this video you feel there's anything I missed, or you have some questions, or there's even some myths that you're not sure about and you want me to check out for you, go ahead and post in the comment section down below. I will respond to you. I thank you all for watching. Until next time, forget everything else, focus on the finish line.